Welcome to the Mother May I podcast with Frank and Irene on Strong Island Entertainment. Gee, I hope I didn't make a mistake with these two. They promised me they'd bring in some really good guests. Well, anyway, here's Frank and Irene.
Oh, well, hello. It's actually just Irene because Frank is running a little late. I don't know where Frank is, but I'm sure he'll be with us momentarily. So thank you so much for joining us on the Mother May I podcast with Frank and Irene. We're usually scheduled on Tuesday at 2 o'clock, but I had to cancel yesterday because I lost a very dear friend of mine yesterday to breast cancer. Fuck you, cancer. Fuck you, breast cancer. And, I thought to myself, you know what? I think that I'm going to address the elephant in the room. I'm going to talk about this. I'm going to take one day to mourn. It's not going to be business as usual because comics and entertainers, but especially for the most part, always have that philosophy, the show must go on. And I thought, you know what? No, I'm not going to have a stiff upper clit or lip or whatever you want to call it. I'm going to sit here and mourn my friend for a day. The show must not go on. I want to be able to remember her and what she meant to me and honor her because she was a very special person. And I think we all have that one, or if you're lucky, more than one or a few friends that we've known most of our lives, that no matter where our paths take us, and life will take us in different paths because such is life, no matter where our life takes us, that you can always rely on those solid, rooted friends. And this girl, and I will, her name is Irene Gasparini, was one of those women. She was one of the girls that she was just like, my posse. She was my girl, somebody that I knew since she was a teenager, somebody that I knew since I was really young. And somebody that, I was in the foxhole with in those jobs that we don't want to do, like, bartending, which is a very difficult job, or waitressing while you're trying to pursue your dreams. In the interim, you're doing all these jobs that you don't want to do. And this was my girl, and we remained friends for our entire lives. And she was so special to me. And sadly, very, very tragically and very sadly, she died yesterday, passed away from breast cancer. Yep. And, this was like the gravitational pull of reality to me once again, because I wanted to talk about the importance of women getting mammograms, being checked regularly, advocating for yourself, bringing a friend with you if you need somebody to advocate for you, and demand that you get the testing that you need. Because in Renee's case, unfortunately, she had breast cancer 4 years ago or so. She beat it. It was in remission. And then it came back about a year ago. And she had been asking her doctor for a certain test, and they didn't give it to her, and she went from nothing to stage 4 breast cancer. So this is something that women, we need to pay attention to. We need to walk in, not only get a mammogram and get checked regularly. And I know that a lot of you, my friends that know me know, Irene, when was the last time you went for a mammogram? And they're right. They're right. I don't go regularly, not at all. I came up from one of those families where, my mother and my father, they never really went to the doctor. I mean, they took us to the doctor. I'm not even quite sure we had health insurance, if we're being honest. The point is that I came from a family that was relatively, if not desperately poor. And so it wasn't a priority for me to continue to get checked up, to go to checkups and go to the doctor and stay on top of these things. Anyway, so I just, I was feeling really sad yesterday, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to take today off and just remember Renee. And, oh, okay, so I see one of the guests is here as I'm rambling on. Anyway, I love you, Renee. And bringing on, here on the show today is this wonderful guy. I've known him for also 30 years. He is a stand-up comedian, and he just happens to run a podcast about grief, It's called Where's the Grief? This man is wonderful, funny, and so awesome. And I'm so glad he's available to jump on the show with me today. Mr. Jordon Ferber, everybody. And I mean, everybody, I'm talking to myself. Jordon, hi. Well, thank God for you, because I'd be on the show by myself, actually.
Well, thank God for you in general. I mean, this is, I don't know if it's been 30 years, but it's been, 20 plus for sure.
30 years, but it's been 20. It's definitely been 20 years. Now, Jordon, when I first met you, I remember you were sketching in a little book, and you were quite sad in those years. Always drawing.
Still got my doodle book right here.
Doodling? Oh my gosh. Art therapy. I'm like, I was ready to steal your book and start doing a psychoanalysis on you. But anyway, you were drawing these intricate, beautiful drawings, and you seemed sad. And you said at that time that you just lost your brother. Now tell us about that period.
Right. So my brother Russell was killed in a car accident in July of 2002, over July 4th weekend, and he was 21 years old. I was 24. I had been doing comedy for about almost 2 years at that point. Mm-hmm. And it was such a surreal experience to be in a position, in a job where I got to go on stage and talk about myself and my life. And yet I had this whole area of my life that I didn't even really have a vocabulary to talk about anywhere yet. Mm-hmm. And so it was very odd. I was living a bit of a double life for a number of years. It was, and even when I started to talk about it, it took me a long time to find.
Sorry, hold on a second. I didn't see that Frank is here. Let's just bring Frank on. I had no idea that Frank was here. Let's bring him on. Sorry about that.
No problem.
I thought he was, okay. So I don't know if Bobby can see that Frank's here. We're having an issue. Oh, here's Frank. Okay, great. So we're all in here now.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see you. And that's painful, actually, to hear you and not see your face.
For me, it's the other way. If you see me, it's more painful.
Difficulty. So Jordon, one of the things that I find that's really difficult, and as soon as Frank joins on, he'll also weigh in on this, is the fact that it's really hard for us to continue doing what we do, making people laugh and go on stage after when we're sad, really deep inside, like right after, like I remember when I first lost my father, he died the next day. I had to go and do my show at the Pit. It was a one-person show. I've been promoting it for months, and I had to get up and start telling jokes. How did you feel about that in your life at the time? Your brother, somebody that you love so much, and then you have to continue doing what you do, making people laugh.
Well, first of all, I found it actually to be the best distraction that there was. I was also working at a club in Times Square where I was still so young in the business. I was handing out flyers in Times Square to people, and just yelling at people in Times Square for a couple hours a night was incredibly therapeutic. I can't,
I love that you were yelling at people in Times Square. That's amazing.
Oh yeah. There was no, the turnover rate of people that walk by you in Times Square every 5 minutes, there's a new 1,000 people. So you could yell whatever you want at strangers, and they didn't even have time to really process what you had said to them before they were a block away.
Right.
And on top of that, being able to, in a weird way, being able to write jokes that were totally disassociated from what my actual life was at that time was actually also somewhat therapeutic. To be able to sort of, really engage my mind in thinking about things that were not at the forefront, trying to do anything to distract myself from what that was. And I'll tell you, comedy saved my life, because I also found that I had a lot of kinship with other comedians who had been through some hard times. That period of time is when I also met Rick Shapiro and Mike DiStefano,
right? And,
guys who were incredibly vulnerable and honest on stage, in ways, and made things that were not remotely funny very, very funny. And I also, my feeling about this has evolved over time, but I really firmly believe that whether or not you get laughs on some of your ideas, you can still really connect with an audience. And I think that there's, an audience knows when you're being genuine with them.
Right.
So, when you're being really genuine about tough topics, and you manage to spin it in such a way that's not soul crushingly depressing, and you take an audience with you, even if the joke doesn't really work, you can still get that warm response to it that you can feel in the room.
Right. And also it's very incredibly cathartic. Let's face it, it's important. I always say that there's always pain before the punchline for me and for so many comics. I think so many comics are people that have been in pain and take that pain and make it relatable to other people. And I think that's the beauty, the connection that you're talking about when it comes to comedy.
Yeah.
So it forces us to get out of our comfort zone. I'm so sorry, everybody. We're having technical difficulties. So I'm trying to, I don't multitask very effectively. Trying to talk and type, which is like walking and chewing gum. But that's what we do, Jordan. We try to take that pain and almost like, for me, taking the power away from pain and making it something that I can laugh at, like in the most loving way.
Yeah.
It empowers me. It puts the power back in my hands, in my voice,
So much of it is about ownership of your own experience. I feel like grief and loss are so difficult to talk about anywhere. Like, my podcast is an hour long. Nobody lets you talk about your grief for an hour, not even a therapist. They cut you off after 45. So, but when it comes to generating material about it as a performer, open mics are one of the few places where you can have a full scale mental breakdown on stage and have it be misdiagnosed as a good set.
Yeah, right. Well, I always say that comedy is sort of like a therapy session. I mean, it really is. I run most of my material to my therapist too. I think they're intertwined somehow. You know what I mean? I'm in my therapist. I'm getting the light in my therapist. The analogies are very similar, but you run this you have this podcast that you've been doing for quite some time. And it's like your podcast to me is not just a podcast. It's not just funny. It's not just serious. It's literally altruistic, and it gives people solace after they've dealt with grief. Now, for all the people, there's a lot of my friends that are hurting right now. Renee left a daughter behind, a young daughter, which is really heartbreaking and crippling. And so what kind of advice, what kind of tools, what can they implement? How can they better deal with the grief? What are some of your suggestions?
Well, so the biggest challenge is, I think, that almost everybody has when dealing with grief is giving ourselves permission to do it the way that we do it. There really isn't a blueprint for it.
Right.
And we're not really taught well how to deal with it as a society. We're taught to sweep it under the rug, walk it off, and don't bother other people with it. So it's hard to find a place for ourselves to really just acknowledge that what we're going through is hard, and the way that we do it is unique to us, and it's not going to look the same every day. I always find that people have a very, we're just taught that we're doing it wrong. Oh, it should be, you should be this far ahead, or you should be.
I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to introduce Mr. Frank Conniff, everybody.
Hi. Finally.
Honestly, Frank, I was having some computer issues with sound at the start of the show. Frank, Mr. Jordon Ferber. I don't know if you guys know each other. Mr. Frank Conniff.
Hey, hi. How you doing?
We've met a number of times in passing. I think I've hosted a show or two that you've been on.
Right. And Frank says, no, you're not memorable at all. I'm just kidding, Frank. Jordon, Frank, we're talking about loss. Jordon has a podcast about grief. It's called Where's the Grief? And you know what? I decided to address the elephant in the room, but Chris Christie isn't here. That was for Frank.
Well, so just to what I was saying is, I feel like we stand in our own way a lot. We really are our own biggest adversary in terms of how we deal with grief, because we think we're doing it incorrectly, when there isn't really a right way. There really aren't a whole lot of answers. It's not a thing that there's no quick fix for it. There's no real there's nothing you can take for it. It just takes time, and it's a thing that you have to integrate into your life, and everybody has their own ways of doing that. For me, it's about, I really strive when I am able to talk about it openly, and finding people that you can really just talk to about it. Mm-hmm. Without judgment or without looking for advice,
right,
has been the most impactful for me.
Because we all deal with it. I want to loop Frank in. Frank, have you ever? I mean, obviously, we've all suffered some level of grief. who was like one of the closest people that you've lost throughout your life?
Well, I mean, my dad died when I was 13.
Wow. 13.
So yeah, so that was that was a big deal when that happened. And but you know what the thing is the era that I come from. It's like people didn't really talk about it. Like there was never any really discussion about dealing with grief. It was just he died and we went to the funeral. And plus my dad had been sick for a long time. So his death was a blessing for him, at least, because his suffering was over. And but pretty much I just went on with my life. And I don't think it's unrelated that I got into drugs and addiction after all that, because I just didn't deal with any of that stuff.
It's so funny. I find it interesting that era of dealing with grief is similar to any other kind of ailment. Like it's literally rub some dirt in the wound and get back out there.
Yeah, exactly. And there was no, and also, my mother at the time that my father got sick and died, my mother was very sick. She had very bad mental illness issues that thankfully she overcame eventually, but she was very depressed and in and out of hospitals, had shock treatments and stuff like that. Wow. So, so there was no infrastructure in our household for us 5 kids to deal with any of that stuff. It was just, well, you're on your own. And I'm like, well, okay, I think.
I thought that the Irish Catholic was the overlooming torturous aspect of your life. Frank, this is a lot. I also had to deal with mental illness issues in my family too. But I never knew that your dad died when you were just 13 years old. I think that's tragic and really hard for a kid to deal with,
Yeah, it is, and that's why, after that, I was pretty much on my own. There was no dealing with it. There was no therapy or anything. And so I was just like, hey, who's got some pot? Who's got, let's buy a 6-pack. And that was pretty much it,
I've talked about that a lot as well, about how, the feelings of grief and sorrow and loss are so unfamiliar that I found myself getting drunk a lot, because at least that was a familiar. Being sad and drunk was not an unfamiliar feeling.
Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And also, later in life, when much later in the mid 80s, when I finally went into drug rehab, one of the counselors there who was really good, very compassionate, she said to me, you have a lot of grief that you're dealing with. And I think that was the first time I'd heard someone tell me that,
Right.
And said, that's a big part of what you've been going through is all your grief. And, and that was very insightful. And then at that point, instead of drugs, I sought out stage time, so.
Which is chasing the dragon times a million. Frank, but that almost gave you permission to feel at that point,
Yeah.
Like, how did this affect the rest of your siblings? First of all, 5 siblings. How did that? Are you the youngest? Where do you fall in the time?
I'm the middle child, which I've been told is a whole other can of worms. But I had 2 older brothers and a younger brother and a younger sister, and everybody dealt with it differently. Some of us. Got in. One of my brothers also got into drugs, but he was more functional doing it, and 2 of my siblings just they channeled it all into scholastic achievement. My sister Lucy, who you know, Irene, she went to the University of Chicago and got great grades, and my brother Mike went to Harvard, which I didn't realize at the time, since I want to be a comedy writer, I should go to Harvard, but I didn't know that, So, so everybody just dealt with it in I think our kind of personalities were kind of set before any of this, and then how we reacted to things was different. And my other brother Rex, who unfortunately died a few years ago, he never took a drug or drank anything in his life. I mean, some people, when they're in that kind of household, some people like me, they get into addiction. Some people go the absolute opposite route. My sister Lucy is like that too. She never got into drugs or drinking or anything like that either.
Right. She like you said, she threw it all into her scholastic achievements, and that's amazing that she became academic.
And that, I would have to say, is a much healthier way of dealing with all that stuff. You know what? Get yourself a graduate from college and rack up some great grades. I think that's a better way than just going out and doing blow and drinking.
Yeah. Now, Jordon has a podcast, like I said, it's called Where's the Grief? Now, have you ever had like people that are grief counselors on your show, Jordon?
I've had some grief counselors on. Yep. I've had some therapists and stuff on. You know, I tend to, I like to have, my conversations are, really trying to get the person rather than the professional to talk about it. But, and I think that grief is one of those things that even a professional only has, the textbook information. You have to have experience with actual individuals to, everybody has their own different response to stuff.
Also, do you agree that like Frank was talking about self-medicating, and we're talking about, sometimes I feel like if there was like something that we could like something that I can implement to help me throughout my life when I lost somebody really important, instead of feeling like like Frank said, we have to maintain this stiff upper clit and we just continue doing what we do. Or I don't know if Frank said that, but that's how I handled grief before.
I keep a stiff upper clit as much as I can.
That's the name of my next album, Frank.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Stiff upper clit. So here's the thing. We just kind of step right into it. Like when my father died, I was telling Jordon, the day after, I went up on stage and ran my show, my one-person show at the Pit. It was hard for me to do that. Now, but yesterday, I had all these things scheduled, and I said, I really just want this. I want to be able to feel and mourn for one day. I'm not so, and it felt kind of good just to not plow through and just not feel it. I'm not saying that I want to go down a rabbit hole, but that one day it kind of felt good just to honor Renee. Not saying that I'm going to forget her in a day either, but my personality is usually just keep going and not feeling. And I don't know if that's healthy either, because then you end up like down the road, like Frank said, you're not dealing with it, and all of a sudden it culminates into this disastrous.
Well, listen, I mean, we're artists, we're comedians, we're performers, we create our own content. There's always that the show must go on type of mentality. Yeah. This is our passion. I can't imagine that somebody that's, an accountant has the same feeling like, oh, I have to get back to crunch these numbers because I feel, maybe they're not, I don't know, but I know that we are so invested in what we do. It's part of who we are.
And it's cathartic, like you said. It's very.
But I think it's cathartic. I also think that just going back and participating in your life, I think can be a healthy thing in a state of grief, and I've noticed that too in a state of depression, and the two are very intertwined. But I have a tendency sometimes to want to retreat from the world, and then I get so far inside my own head that's when the real trouble starts. When I'm it's like an Escher painting inside my head of thoughts, and going in all kinds of patterns and driving me crazy. And I think there is something to be said for just going back to your job, going back to, if you can, if you can handle that. And just being around people and being a part of life as much as you can.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You're right, Frank, because you don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And that's why today I said, you know what, pack it on. Yesterday I felt, I just wanted to feel what I was feeling. And then, but you're right, it's different for everybody. I'll tell you something. It's true. I don't know, whatever works for you, but the main thing is not to go down that rabbit hole where you're retreating and you're isolating and you're falling into that,
that's why also if you're in a state of grief or depression, it's a good thing to get professional help and talk to people about it, because that can prevent you from getting trapped in your own head too much. And even just, I remember one time I was going through a really severe depression, and I went to a therapist. It was like one of these like kind of sliding scale kind of places, you know, and it was just this nice woman that I talked to every week, and just having like a friendly, like sympathetic person to listen to you. You know, I don't know if she had any great insight into anything, but it was helpful just to talk to someone whose job it was to sit there and listen to you.
Right, exactly. It's like you don't even care if she has a fucking psychology diploma. Or
yeah,
whatever.
I think she was in training for one anyway. She didn't even have one yet. It was that kind of thing where you didn't have to pay a lot of money. So you got like students and stuff. It was like going to a barber school or something, but with better results, I think.
With better results, because it just feels good to have somebody to talk to and just to get it out. I mean, obviously, when you hold things in, that's where the real trouble starts.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So, Jordon, I was talking to Jordon because I don't know if you know this, Frank, but when I first met Jordon, he had just lost his brother, Russell, to a car accident. And
how horrible.
Horrible. And it took him quite some time to really, I mean, obviously you're never really fully over it, but I remember you were in such a painful place. Now, what do you think, at what point did you feel like you felt more like, I don't know, that you were just kind of able to move on with your life?
What's today? There is no one point really. I mean, it's such a gradual, adaptation to the new circumstances of my life, and taking a lot of more control over the direction I move things in. You know, the fact that I have this podcast, I run a support group for bereaved siblings through an organization called the Compassionate Friends. It's a self-help support group, and I've been doing that for about 10 years. I've been running my podcast for about 5 years. I think there's, you know, these are all things that I had my brother not died, I would never have been involved in. And certainly even in the few years after he died, I had no intention of ever having things like that as the cornerstones of what my life looks like. So it's been very gradual. I think, you know, the hardest part, as I go back to this over and over again, is that we don't even know if what we're doing is working. Sometimes I feel like we just have to spend a lot less time beating ourselves up for how we have done it. You know, you can always look forward to the future. There's always, you know, I always say my process has been trial and error, mostly error.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like when I find a time where I'm able to be self-aware of the fact that I've just spent a week totally in my mind at a pity party, once I get myself out of that or figure out a plan on out of that, I'm not going to spend any time kicking myself for having been there in the first place. Like, you know, I that's what at least the goal is, to try not to spend any time kicking myself for what I did.
In the pandemic, at least, we're not allowed to even go to pity parties because of the social distancing.
You have to socially distance at pity parties, Frank. One of the things that helped me, I was really torn up. But Frank, I didn't realize that you lost your dad at 13. I'm sorry I didn't. That's really hard. I lost my dad. I thought I lost my dad young, and I was very devastated. One of the things that helped me was to actually go to the gravesite and visit him. And this may sound a little macabre. I would like pack a lunch, a sandwich, going to visit him. I mean, it's the best relationship we ever had, honestly. We didn't spend much time together when he was alive, to be honest. You know what I mean? So I enjoyed doing that and just sitting there and visiting him. So that gave me, that really helped me a lot. You know,
that's great. My dad is buried in Danbury, Connecticut, which is his hometown, and my brother Rex is buried there too. And that's a whole other area of grief I went through too. And Rex died about like 8 years ago or so. And but I haven't been back to that gravesite since we buried Rex there. And that sounds like a good idea. You know?
Well, I would love to take you if you want to go, Frank.
Sure.
Once we're double vaxxed, because we're double vaxxed. I don't know about you, Jordon.
Mm-hmm. I got the first one.
Yeah, I'm on my first too. Are you double now, Irene?
No, I'm almost double.
Okay.
I'm double, I'm going to be fucking climbing into your window. Believe me. Okay.
Listen, I'm just happy. I'm just happy. I'm just happy that we can get shots for spring break this year. You know, I'm taking shots.
Oh yeah, we're taking shots for spring breaks. Yeah,
Make,
no
make
shots.
mine a double.
We're doing doubles, but yeah, I feel like that was something that really, you know, I think maybe that's a trip that we need to take, Frank. It just feels so good to, you know, sit there and talk without being interrupted from my father and just have a conversation, pack a lunch. There's something that feels nice about that. You know, I was never one of these, let's go to the cemetery, you know, because we've been, as a child, we were dragged to the cemetery with my mother to go see my grandparents. And I never had that until I grew up and I actually lost my father. And I started doing that on my own. And it felt really, really good, you know? So maybe we'll do that, Frank. I think that
that would be great. And it would help me get away from my building, which is on top of an ancient Indian burial ground. So need to get away.
You know, we had Russell cremated, so he isn't buried anywhere. I find that I can actually talk to him anywhere. You know, if I'm in that kind of a mood, I feel like I most of the time I'll try to find some privacy to do it. But if you're walking out and about in the city, just make sure you have like a Bluetooth headset on so it looks like you're talking to somebody.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's funny because
I without judgment. Yeah.
My brother Rex, like things just come up. Like I'll watch a movie or something, and I remember that he recommended the movie to me, and the whole reason I'm watching it is because he told me it was good. Or if I'm watching like The Simpsons, which we both loved, or if I'm watching SCTV, which we both loved, like it always like kind of brings him back to me, and it's weird. I really feel in those kind of moments like I am kind of communing with him, just because I'm enjoying something that was something that bonded us. There were so many things, and you know, my brother Rex was a very conservative Republican, and so I just never talked politics with him, and we always talked about the things, you know, old movies and comedy and things that we both loved, and that's kind of what's still with me to this day about him.
That's how you only talked about the things that you connected to. I love the name Rex. It's such a damn cool
name. He hated it, but everybody else thought it was the coolest name ever, and he hated it. Yeah. And
your dad, Rachel Feinstein, and I were laughing. We're like, oh my God, we've got some throbbing between the legs with your dad. He was like the hottest guy ever. Frank's dad was like what was your dad again? He was like a journalist, remember?
A journalist. He wrote for Hearst newspapers. Newspaper in New York at the time called the Journal American. He was a columnist and also an editor, and traveled the world covering the news of the world. And he covered three wars: World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and had a very interesting life. Although unfortunately cut very short. He died very young.
How old was he when he died, Frank?
He was 57.
Wow.
Okay, 57 years old. And you said that he was sick, like it wasn't sudden, right? He had health issues.
No, he had like for 5 years before he died, he had a massive stroke. So for a large portion of my childhood, he was just in our house, incapacitated, and he was in the Rusk Institute for a while, which is a rehabilitative place in New York. And when he died, he was in the Mary Manning Walsh nursing home, which is not far from where I live now. It's actually York Avenue. Once you get past 72nd Street, it's like the most depressing part of New York. I hate to say it. It's nothing but hospitals. Nothing but hospitals between 72nd and the 59th Street.
I lived on 78.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so for me, it's like the row of death, because I walked past the Mary Manning Walsh nursing home where my dad died. And then there's the animal hospital where 2 of my cats have died, you know, so it's brutal to walk through that neighborhood.
There's so much. Now, Jordon, you said Greek people, when somebody dies, and I'm sure it's the same with Catholics, Frank, it's always like the open casket. There's a lot of like, you know, it's just I don't know if it's like this for Catholics, but Greek people, it's a lot of mourning, a lot of wearing black, a lot of suffering. They're martyrs. Now, you mentioned we do not do the cremation for Greeks. We just don't. We do the burial like a corpse. Now, when you say cremation, I love that you cremated him. Did you do something special for your brother? Like, really,
So, Russell died at 21, so we had no idea, what he wanted. We our idea was to have him cremated, and we were going to sprinkle his ashes at his favorite spots around the world and the places that he wanted to visit. And so we've done a little bit of that. We've sprinkled him in certain spots in San Francisco near where he lived, and off by the Golden Gate Bridge, in Colorado on some ski areas. We actually sprinkled a little bit of him in inside the locker room at Madison Square Garden.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, that's
and we still have a fair amount of ashes left. It's a very, it was a good idea, and I think it still is a good idea, but I find it to be, and we also sprinkled some of him in Amsterdam and in Switzerland where we have friends. It is a very different physical experience to sprinkle ashes by hand than you think of it conceptually. I have a different experience pretty much every time we've done it. It's always its own kind of weird, emotional, visceral response that I have.
Mm-hmm.
I think my brother Rex is actually cremated, but he's in that one spot though. He has a grave spot there.
Yeah.
Though, in that cemetery.
He's in an urn and he's buried.
Yes, I believe so.
I think part of the reason we didn't have Russell buried anywhere is we didn't want to feel guilty for not having having a spot to visit, but I, to a certain degree, there is an element of not having a centralized location to go, and do it. I think we did pretty well considering with the information we had, at the time, but
One thing that should be comforting, I think, is that I don't think the dead give a shit whether we visit them at their grave sites or not. They're wherever they are, if they're anywhere. They're way past caring about that.
Yeah, they're not. They're not. They don't care. It's for us, the living.
Right.
And that's the thing. Like I can commune with Russell anywhere. If I'm having a good day and I'm out and about laying in the sun, I can also talk to Russell there. Like, hey, look what a beautiful day we're having. Thanks, Russ.
Right.
I can credit him for it if I want.
One of my favorite ways to reconnect with somebody, and I do this all the time. I do it with Renee. I love to do this, is tell stories about that person, like funny stories about somebody who's deceased or somebody that you love. I feel like that really brings them back to life. Just remembering them and laughing, because you're evoking an emotion when you're talking about them, and you're bringing. That's what I love about stories, and that's what I love about when you eulogize somebody. I always hated those like very. Not hated, but I feel like the funnest eulogies that I've been to. The ones that were the most of anyway, but the ones
the funerals I've killed the hardest at.
You know what I have to say is really annoys me is I've been to a few memorial tributes to comedians who've died, and everyone who gets up to speak is just doing stage time,
roasting.
Yeah, they're just trying to get their, and I totally understand that. And some are like very sincere and tell great stories, but then some are just like, give me the light at 5,
Yeah.
I've definitely been to some comedian funerals where people have burned the light for sure.
Yeah. They're roasting. They're going over. It's about them. It's not about whoever's laying in the box. It's a horrifying thing. You're right. And there should be a light at comedy funerals. I've also seen that. But I do think it's a little uplifting when it's not so. When you're telling a story and it's coming from the heart and you're telling funny stories, that's kind of like my favorite thing. I want to hear about.
It's cathartic when you hear like a story about someone who died, and it makes you laugh thinking about them, and you laugh affectionately about them, and you remember them fondly. I think that's a cathartic thing.
It is a cathartic thing. And, you know, I remember like when Jordon, I don't know if you knew Poppy Kramer. Did you know?
Of course. Yeah, I knew Poppy. I knew Poppy from way back.
Poppy Kramer. Yes, but I'm asking Frank if he knew Poppy Kramer.
I don't think I did, no.
You know, she died suddenly. And, you know, when I went to the wake, it was like one of the nicest wakes I've ever been to, because it was like, you know, you were hearing all these different people that I've never met before, just telling the story. You know, Poppy's a very funny person. She was hysterical.
Yeah.
Just a brilliant comic, really quick, just an amazing person. So even if you weren't a comic and you were telling the story about her, it was still funny, you know? So it was just interesting to see all these people coming together and telling these stories about her, whether they were comics or not. They were always funny, and they were coming from different perspectives. So you felt like you really knew her in a different way, even, you know, when you left the eulogy, I felt like I reconnected with her in a different way. Anyway, so yeah, death is a part of life, as we know. My title is Irene Bremis is sad, but I'll tell you what I'm not sad about. I'm not sad about my friend not suffering anymore. You know, I'm happy that she's out of her state of suffering, because she was suffering for a really, really long time. And I think sometimes we selfishly want to keep people alive. Like I did that with my father. I almost didn't give him permission to die. He was like literally a head on the stick, and I was like, don't leave me, Dad. So desperate, you know what I mean? And I remember saying, I don't know how much longer I can hang on. And I'm like, and then my sister finally gave him permission. She literally said, Dad, it's okay to let go. And he died the next day. He actually died that night.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's important for us to let people go, and if they're suffering, especially, you know, it doesn't do them any good to just continue suffering for so long.
Right, exactly. So it's like it's such a, you know, it's important for us to also recognize that, you know, but it's a part of life, you know, and I don't know. I'm sure someone's going to want to, and I know Frank is going to love this, connect with them on a seance. People, you know, are you kidding me? Yanni didn't even want to be bothered when he was alive. The last thing he's going to want me fucking doing a seance to dig out of his rest. Very much needed after we put up with my mother rest. But there's, you know, there's always ways, you know, that we can.
Well, I think that, I'm sorry to.
No, go.
I think that what we've been talking about, what Jordon has been talking about, how he communes with his brother when it's a nice day and he's just out and he's thinking about him, or how I think about my brother Rex. It like that does bring them back to us, and that's like the real version of a seance. You know, it took time
to get there. I'll tell you. You know, those first few years, I'd be sitting in the sun like, I can't believe Russell's missing this. You know, there was a long period of that.
Right,
also.
Right. But I think, you know, our mourning and grieving, it's very painful to us. And I think people who do things like seances and claim they talk to the dead, I have such contempt for them, because they're exploiting people's grief. You know, we're on this show talking about grief. These people take people in a lot of pain and they exploit it, because people so desperately would love to be able to talk to their deceased relatives or their deceased friends. And the people who prey on that are really reprehensible, as far as
they are reprehensible. And you know, Frank, I always joke, but I absolutely 100% vehemently do not believe that people can talk to the dead. I'm sorry, I just don't. And I believe that they are preying on vulnerability and pain. They really, really are. You know, it's easy to say, and believe me, after my dad, I actually, you know, I went to this wedding. It was like an industry wedding, and there was one of these women, like I forget what her name was, but she was at the table. My friend who was working for William Morris, she goes, come on, let's go try to talk to her about your dad, you know? And I'm like, I don't really want to interrupt her, but there's always like these little things, you know, like they'll say crazy things like, is there a J in the family? Literally, there's like this blueprint of things that they're going to say, and they bait you. I mean, they're really informed. It's very manipulative.
It's a trick. It's, you know, people will say, oh, well, that psychic like knew things that how could they have possibly known? Well, it's a trick, and they figure out how to do it. It's a con, and it goes back centuries. You know,
it goes back centuries, and you're also being baited, so you're giving a lot of information along the way without even unbeknownst to me. I was actually giving her information by either gesturing a nod or saying yes, or you know what I mean. You also feed them information without knowing it. You know,
right?
But anyway, I mean, I wish I could believe in it, but I don't. Jordon, what did you? You're not saying anything. Did you ever?
I've been to a couple of. I've been to a few mediums. I've met. I've met and spent some time with a man named James von Prague, who's supposedly a pretty well known medium.
I know him.
And you know, it's I'm conflicted about it because you know I happen to agree with Frank that you know they're if like. I don't know. I take everything with a grain of salt. I'm a huge skeptic, but you know the possibility that this shit is real. Like I want to believe it so much that my own feelings about it are so biased. But I think that you know if they really are preying on people, they're the worst human beings on the planet. And having spent a significant you know some time with one that wasn't working at the time. I believe that he believes it, which might be even more dangerous.
Yeah, they're either delusional or they're grifters, one or the other.
It is more dangerous if they're delusional. You know, that's how people drank Kool-Aid. Okay, so it's very scary. But
I do know this. I do believe that there are things and forces in the universe that we don't understand. I like to believe in more than just you know random coincidences. And the things that are free for me to believe on that level, I do because there's no downside to it. Like if I want to believe that Russell sent me a butterfly to make me feel good, and it makes me feel good, there is no legitimate reason for somebody to say no, that's not him. That's just you know the migratory patterns of that particular kind. Like fuck you. Why
stop coming to my parade?
When I find things that make me feel good, that are free, that cost nothing but my belief in it, there's no downside to me believing it. It's not going to leave me.
I agree 100%.
And that's how I try to think about the medium stuff. Like as long as they're not overbearing in terms of like I don't put any of my own money up for it. I don't really try to spend a lot of time obsessing about it. And I like to think that the moments that I feel connected via something, whether or not it's true, if it makes me feel good, I'm inclined to go with it because
absolutely. And you know, I've seen like cardinals come to my window after my father died, and I'm like, oh, this is like dad coming as a message. Listen, I think that there is no danger. I do believe there's something else. I think energy gets recycled. I don't know if Frank believes that, but I absolutely don't believe you hit the dirt and there's nothing left. We're energy, you know, and you can't kill energy. So I definitely believe in that. In the same breath, I think maybe a lot of these mediums that say that they're mediums, maybe they're psychic. I don't know how I feel about psychic abilities. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like you feel about what Jordon said. I mean, I kind of.
But that's different from. Because there is a thing of like intuition and you know and synchronicity, and there is like a mysterious force in the world, but I think it's beyond any of our understandings, but it's something that you can kind of pick up on a little bit, like here and there, and it can be meaningful to you. But to me, that's a whole different thing than someone saying, I'm a psychic, I can read your mind, I can predict the future for you, I can communicate with your dead relative. Then it enters the realm of complete bullshit in every case.
I mean, you know, it goes back to like
negative seed, Frank. That's the other thing with psychics. Let me just say that if a psychic tells you something negative, you are now burying that, imprinting that fucking memory in your head, and it really can have a negative effect in your future. You know, so there's that. But I think that a lot of the times maybe they're picking up on that synchronicity that you're talking about, Frank, but they're not really conversing with the dead.
No, they're not. And they're probably the least spiritual people you'll ever meet.
I also always think that, my brother did not believe in any of that stuff. He had a friend who was a big John Edwards fan, and he used to laugh at her and like poo-poo it, like, oh, that's such bullshit. And so I used to think, like, if you don't believe in it here, would you believe in it on the other side? Like, I could just totally see my brother up, on the other side being like, yeah, I hear there's this asshole over here that says he can communicate with the living.
Yeah. And his name is Prague. No, I'm just kidding. That guy's like a big psychic, isn't he? He's that guy that does that show, right? He's small and stocky.
Who? John Edwards? Yeah,
no, not John Edwards. That guy that you're talking about, Van Prague.
Oh, James Van Prague. Yeah. I don't think he's on TV anymore. He did a couple of specials back in the day, but he's not on TV really. He does. He's written a couple of books, and I don't even know if he does a private practice anymore. I'm not sure what he's doing. I know he's he does a lot of stuff on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. He does on Facebook. Okay, yeah.
His private practice is dead, ironically enough.
I love it. Oh God, you guys. See, I feel better already. I really, really do. Yesterday I was feeling, not to say that I'm still not, I'm going to be sad. I'm always going to miss her forever. There is no set time, like Jordon said, that you forget about somebody. You'll miss them forever, but it's important to continue working, like Frank said, especially hanging out with friends so that you don't go down a rabbit hole. We're going to be wrapping this up in 5 seconds, but Jordon, I just wanted you to be able to tell people about your podcast, where they can find it. And
yeah, my podcast is called Where's the Grief? You can find it at where'sthegrief.com or on iTunes or on Stitcher and Spotify. And I just also want to mention that my organization that I work for is called the Compassionate Friends. They're a self-help support group that supports parents, grandparents, and siblings. They have groups all over the country. My group meets on Zoom. And it's free, and there are lots of great opportunities to just find resources and support for what you're going through. If the Compassionate Friends is not a fit, there are other self-help support groups out there like that for other types of loss that I think are very impactful. Being able to talk about it with other people that are going through a similar thing.
That's great. Well, thank you. You're doing such a really beautiful thing for people.
Yeah, absolutely.
So selfless and altruistic and amazing. Frankie boy, what's in the pipeline for you? You've got a big show coming up. I know you do.
April 13th, Trace, Bill, you and I will be doing our next live streaming Mystery Science Theater style movie riffing show. We're going to be doing an evening of short films, which are always really fun.
Nice.
And that'll be Tuesday, April 13th. At 8 p.m. Go to eventbrite.com for tickets.
That's right. You won't regret it. I can't wait to catch one live, Frank. That was a lot of fun for me when we were in Brooklyn watching you.
Yeah, hopefully by this time next year we'll be doing real live shows again.
I can't wait. I absolutely can't wait. Well, I'm Irene. I do this show, and Frank and I we got roped into another show at 7:00. Which is also posted on our Facebook page if you want to check that out. And I just want to say that I love you guys. Thank you so much for taking an entire hour to talk about this. It means a lot to me, especially because Renee was so special to me. She was one of my best friends. And Bobby, you can go ahead and put that picture up. I just want to put that little picture of me and Gaspo. There's my girl.
Oh, nice.
Cat lady. Frank, you would be so proud of her. I know how you love the kitties. This girl has rescued more cats than anybody.
Oh, wow.
I mean, this girl did more for cats and human beings, of course. And there was Peter, Rachel's husband, in the background, photobombing. But anyway, and Bobby, can you also put that picture up of Renee? Look at how beautiful she is.
Wow, stunning.
I just want to dedicate this show to her and just tell her how much I love her and how much she'll be missed. But she'll always be in our thoughts and our prayers. And thank you for everybody who tuned in, or nobody who tuned in. Then you can catch the archive. Guys, you're the greatest. I love you.
Love you.
Mwah. We'll see you next week, Tuesday. Another fantastic goddamn show with Mr. Frank Conniff and I. Jordon, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Great job.
Thanks for tuning in to the Mother May I podcast with Frank and Irene on Strong Island Entertainment. Check us out next week when Frank and Irene sit down with, you know what? I don't know what these two are going to do next, but we'll see you next week.